zoom out and talk about Pope Francis's legacy.
He got off, I think, to a very good start, defending religious liberty and the like. Quite frankly, I think there were some reporters, not all of them, who had an agenda, and they baited him.
In regards to the famous plane ride where he said, "Who am I to judge?" what we all think he said, he did not say. Would you tell that story and clarify what he really said?
He began to be surrounded by some people, I think, with more on the left social justice type of an agenda and seemed to be persuaded by them. And you get this kind of liberation theology, which is more Marxist than it is the gospel, let's face it. There's a sense amongst most of the cardinals who will vote that the pendulum needs to get back to the middle.
Yeah.
I don't know who we're going to get. I do think that someone is going to recognize that we've got to bring it back to a more traditional strain. Otherwise, we're going to alienate the very people who are the heart and soul of the Catholic Church.
What a great dinner last night.
That was fantastic. That place, the ambiance was just a knockout.
It's awesome. Yeah, that's where I love taking our special VIP guests. The Webb Custom Kitchen, shout out to the local Gastonia establishment. But you joined my dad and I, and for me, it was like seeing you two guys, like two peas in a pod. You know,
He's a great guy.
I mean, you're kind of right in the same generation.
Yep.
What year were you born?
1947.
Okay, so he's 1950. So you guys are right there at the same time.
Yep.
But I was thinking, I wanted to say it during dinner, but here is an Irish Catholic Southerner from the very town that we're in with an Irish Catholic New Yorker, and like we're in an old bar. It sounds like a joke, you know, but you know,
we have our accents.
it was awesome. But you know, what's amazing to me is despite like how different those cultures are, when you have unity around the faith and common sense, you have everything in common.
That's true.
Even though you're different sides of the Mason-Dixon line. You know?
I could go out with them many times.
Yeah, it was a lot. And he had a time of his life too. So, well, you know, I don't think Dr. Bill Donohue needs a whole lot of introduction to most of my listeners, but I am going to read a little introduction of you. And you're one of these incredible guys where I just have to skim the surface, because if I read everything, we'd be here a long time given all your accomplishments. But I'm going to do a little bit of introduction here. So today's guest is Dr. Bill Donohue, President and CEO of the Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights, the nation's largest Catholic civil rights organization. Since taking the helm in 1993, Dr. Donohue has become one of the most recognized and fearless defenders of the Catholic Church in America, battling religious discrimination and shaping cultural debates at the highest levels. He holds a PhD in sociology, which many people often forget, from New York University, taught at college level for many years, and has authored, I think it's 11 books and thousands of articles on religion, politics, and culture. And we're pleased to announce that he's publishing a new book with Tan, which will be coming out in the next couple months after hearing this episode. Dr. Donohue also serves as the publisher of Catalyst, the Catholic League's journal, and contributes regularly to Newsmax. His leadership has earned him numerous awards, including an honorary doctorate of laws from Ave Maria School of Law. Congratulations on that. That was recent. He's known for his sharp intellect, passionate advocacy, and unapologetic defense of the faith. Dr. Donohue remains one of the most influential Catholic voices in American life today, so much so that he had to be woken up about 4 a.m. by Fox News for a comment on the death of the Pope. But that gives you a little indication of the influence he wields when one of the largest news media outlets in the world wants to know exactly what he has to think minutes after the news breaks of the Holy Father's death. So with all of that and much more, which I can't cover everything, I'm very happy to welcome you, Dr. Donohue, to this table.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And the people I've met, I can see why North Carolinians have such a good reputation.
Well, that's why when the Northerners move here, they never leave.
I can see that.
It's very good for our property values, you know, and bad for our traffic. But yeah. Well, good. So, yeah, I mean, it's funny because we actually had you scheduled to come and to be on the show anyway before the before Pope Francis passed.
Sure.
And so it would be kind of crazy to not talk about Pope Francis's legacy, which is what we're going to focus on in this particular episode. And we're going to have a subsequent episode, by the way, talking about his upcoming book with us entitled Christianity and the Crosshairs, Ruling Class and Radicals Find a Common Enemy. So that's going to be a great conversation. But the news is urgent. And as we're sitting here now, we got news, just as you got in my car picking you up from the your hotel, that the conclave has been postponed a few days. And we'll maybe talk about your thoughts on that. We'll get there. But I'm just trying to give people a sense this is real time. This is real. And we're going to try to release this in the next couple of days. But let's zoom out and talk about Pope Francis's legacy. Now, my viewers know that I have many critiques of the man, but may his soul rest in peace. It's very obvious to say that, but I shouldn't have to say it, but I want to say it. We pray for this man's soul, his salvation, and we're grateful for the many good things that he did do. It wasn't all bad. He did some things, and he had certain traits that are admirable. And you've talked about that openly. So before we kind of get into some of the negatives that naturally we would talk about, can you talk to us a little bit about some of those traits and things and the way he spoke and his attitudes on things that you did like about him?
I had the pleasure of meeting him in 2015, Pope Francis, in Washington, D.C., and he gave a stellar speech on defense of religious liberty. He also canonized Hanapuro Serra. Father Serra did more to help the Indians and to defend their human rights than any other person in this country. Before, you're talking here, going back to about the 18th century.
Sure.
But the fact of the matter is, he got off, I think, to a very good start, defending religious liberty and the like. Clearly, traditional Catholics like myself very much appreciate his condemnation of abortion, referred to it as murder. He referred to it as the work of the hitmen. He condemned gender ideology as demonic, used stronger language than his predecessors, Pope Benedict XVI and St. John Paul II. He also invoked the devil more than any pope, certainly in my lifetime, in recognizing that there's evil in the world. I think that as he grew in the pontificate, he began to be surrounded by some people I think would more on the left social justice type of an agenda and seemed to be persuaded by them. Look, I've often said here recently to the media that he actually had some things in common stylistically with President Trump.
I can see it. Yeah, I can see it.
Both of them are off the cuff. They speak from the heart. They're blunt. They're unscripted. And people like that, as opposed to these people who are very close-minded and close-lipped, and they're not going to get anything out of them. The problem is it sometimes gets you into trouble.
Yeah.
And when the Pope would go overseas, he would deliver a wonderful mass and homilies and reach out to the people. On the papal plane on the way back to Rome, that's where I think he got sandbagged. Quite frankly, I think there were some reporters, not all of them, who had an agenda, and they baited him. And unfortunately, he kind of went for it and said things that most of us were pinched by it. Then the next day, they'd have to walk it back in the Vatican. Now, we're all capable of doing that once in a while, but he did it repetitiously once over and over and over again. And he was warned by people, listen, you're sitting down with a 91-year-old atheist and you don't have anybody else in the room and it's not taped. So after the interview is over, he comes out and he tells everybody what went on. And then you're later saying none of it's true. Well, why didn't you have somebody in the room? Why didn't you listen to somebody? Why didn't you have a tape recording so you could dispute him? This went on for years, actually.
Yeah.
So I think, I like the unscripted character of Pope Francis, but impulsiveness can get you into trouble. And I think it did with him on many occasions.
In reflecting on the positives of his life, his emphasis on mercy, it's a good thing. We need that. He did seem to have a genuine, I don't think it was all for stage. I think he had a genuine care for the poor and a desire to live simply. He would, I think every Friday he would do some kind of work of mercy or service. He would go to a lot of prisons. He would visit the sick. I mean, he did that. I mean, one of the last things he did was, to go visit a prison. And sometimes I'd make it into the media, but sometimes not. So it seemed like in one way or another, he really did try to live the doctrines of the faith. But when it came to being a teacher of it, it was terrible. It was abysmal, in my opinion. So there might be a way to look at that and say a man tried to live it, but he couldn't teach it.
I like the way you had that bifurcation here because it's true of all of us sometimes. There's a certain inconsistency built into the human animal, but here with regard to Pope Francis, I don't ever question his intent. His intent was pure, but the effects of what your policies and your thinking and your teachings are could be somewhat different. Take the poor. I would give him high marks for reaching out to the poor and working with them and tending to them. On the other hand, he had an adversarial relationship with the United States and certainly with market economies.
Yeah.
He embraced socialism. Socialism produces more poverty than any economic system in the modern world. So if you're concerned about the poor, why would you endorse a system which generates more of them? So I hold him accountable for that. I think his understanding of capitalism was deficient, quite frankly, and he didn't quite understand what it was about. He had in his mind a model which we would call more mercantilist or corporatist, maybe out of Juan Perón and what he saw in Argentina. But so I guess this bothers me because I worked in Spanish Harlem for years with Black and Puerto Rican kids. I work with the poor. I help make the illiterate literate. And when I was at NYU studying for my PhD, all these left-wing students would be decrying, nobody's doing anything about the poor. I said, oh, I'm glad you're so interested. Perhaps you'll come on Saturdays and do a tutorial with my students in Spanish Harlem. Well, that's when they all fell silent. No, actions matter, not just rhetoric. So I'm very much a realist that. I want to find out if you're against poverty, then you should be in favor of systems which do more to alleviate and ameliorate it as opposed to promote it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, in 20 years from now, what's the man going to be remembered for? I mean, positive or negative or both? What's he going to be remembered for?
I think it's a mixed legacy. On the positive side, people will credit him for being humble. He certainly wasn't an elitist. He talked about the airport priest and how you have to just tend to your own people. Don't be always running around. I think that kind of humbleness is something which is appealing to a lot of people. On the negative side, clearly, it's going to be the moral confusion that he created. And again, I'm not saying he did it intentionally. I am saying that the effects of what he's doing, when you tell people, for example, that homosexuality is a sin and we should combat it, and there's no place for people, if you're a sinner, we all go to confession and you're relieved of your sins. But the fact of the matter is, if he says homosexuals are not welcome in the priesthood, he picked that up from Benedict XVI. He was very good on that. At the same time, he was appointing cardinals in the United States and choosing people to head the synod like Hollerich from Luxembourg, who said the Catholic Church's teachings on homosexuality are wrong.
Yeah.
Well, if the teachings are wrong and you're telling us, you're telling us on the one hand, you believe the teachings are right, but you're appointing people to senior positions like Cardinal McElroy in Washington, D.C., who says the Catholic Church's teachings on homosexuality are wrong, don't be surprised if a lot of us just scratch our head and say, what's going on here? He was riddled with contradictions.
Yeah.
And so I guess people can, when you go down that road, people can kind of pick and choose then the good and the bad. To be fair, there was some of both.
Do you think the word confusion is an aphorism?
Well, I tell you, just about everybody I have spoken to, and I do run in some circles which are not always traditional, people do scratch their head. They don't know what's going on. I was very pleased that Cardinal Dolan, just as he's ready to leave for Rome, was concerned about the need for clarity. You can talk to Bill Donohue, staff at the Catholic League. If there's one word I stress more than any other word when it comes to communication, it's clarity. In writing and speaking, we don't want to be ambiguous, because I met those Marxists when I was studying for my PhD in sociology at NYU, and they would intentionally obfuscate. They would try to be muddled thinking. And that way you can never prove them wrong. So like if you would demonstrate that Marx was wrong, they say, no, Marx wasn't wrong. You just didn't get what he said. That's not what he meant. No, we want to speak with clarity. The Pope did speak with clarity on the papal plane. He was refreshing. He was so blunt. Sometimes it got him into trouble. But then in terms of his teachings, people would say, wait a minute, you say that you welcome into the church the people who accept the teachings of the church, yet you have a problem with some traditionalists, and particularly with the Latin Mass, and yet you welcome into the Vatican people like Janine Gramick, who worked to destroy the Catholic Church, quite frankly. I've written about it voluminously, and she's welcomed in. So how come the sons and daughters who expressed and professed fidelity to church teachings are sometimes marginalized, and then the ones who should be marginalized are now accepted? So I'm bothered when people say, well, the Pope reached out to the marginalized. He did, some of them. Unfortunately, he also did a good job in marginalizing people who shouldn't be marginalized, namely the people who practice fidelity to the teachings of the Catholic Church.
Yeah. We're gonna get into his attack on traditionalists shortly, but you've mentioned the plane rides a couple times. So, one of the things that I love about Bill Donohue is that clarity thing. I mean, you have an ability to find the real story of what actually happened as opposed to just reading headlines. I don't know how you do that. I mean, but I don't know if you get transcripts. I don't know, but you have researchers and you dig to find the real story, because part of your whole mission is to find the bias in the media against the Catholic Church. And so in regards to the famous plane ride where he said, "Who am I to judge?" You've made it very clear. I've heard you, read you, I can't remember because it just blurs. That what we all think he said, he did not say. Would you tell that story and clarify what he really said?
Hey, thanks guys for checking out the Conor Gallagher Show. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, or comment, or whatever you got to do to support it. And I appreciate that very much.
You have to look beyond the headlines. Yes, we have to do the digging. But I want the original transcript. I can't go off of somebody else's take, because they it could have been a mistake, what they're saying, or sometimes it's intentional. The Pope was asked a question about one particular priest who had charges against him of sexual impropriety. The priest claimed to be innocent. They asked him, it was about a homosexual relationship, and they asked him about him, and he said, "Who am I to judge him?" Notice I said him. That was cut off. That was intentional.
The pronoun was literally...
It was literally cut off. It was literally excised intentionally by the media. You can find the actual truth. All you have to do is take a look at anything I've written. I didn't make it up. It's out there. It's in the original transcript. And they did that because they wanted to set it up this way. They played him. The media played the Pope. They wanted him to basically say that homosexuality, now we're talking behavior,
right,
as opposed to a status,
right,
or somebody who happened to have an accusation against him. They wanted to basically get him to say, we're sanctioning this.
Right.
He never did say that, in fairness to Pope Francis. They try to frame him on that, as far as I'm concerned. He's talking about one particular priest. Who am I to judge him? Once you leave the pronoun out, then you can then make the argument he was talking about behavior. That's simply a lie.
So he was most likely talking about, who am I to judge this particular man in this particular situation,
right,
meaning I don't know how credible the accusations are.
Right.
As opposed to, who am I to judge the homosexuality?
Absolutely. And there's a profound difference, and you said it very well. That's exactly the difference. And that was not reported by the media. They constantly tried to make him a person who fit the left script on so many things, and they would cheer him on that. So when he did say abortion was murder, they didn't want to report on it, because that would get in the way of their narrative, is that he's a social left-wing champion. And so, the media, not all of them again, but too many of them, they were playing games with us.
On that note, I got so much research. I only brought like a snippet of everything you've done. I mean, by the way, your articles on the Catholic League website, catholicleague.com, I believe it is.
.org,
sorry. catholicleague.org. Let's make sure, guys, we put that plenty in the show notes. But your articles are short. I don't know if you have a word count you aim for, but it's like 1,000 words or less, I would say. And you can read them in 5 minutes, and they're incredible. I mean, they're the clarity, they're punchy, they're informative. They often debunk what you see in headline news, other places. They're awesome. So I just highly encourage the listeners to go check out catholicleague.org and read his articles. But I was searching through your archives, and I found one that you wrote all the way back in 2013. It's called Pope Benedict and Pope Francis. And don't worry, I'm not going to like quiz you on what you wrote, but
I do my own writing. That's unlike some people.
Well, I know you do, but it's impossible to remember everything. You've written so many articles. You have forgotten more of what you have written than what most people have ever read. So, but on this point about the media fawned over Francis and protected him, and but they distorted Benedict's image as much as possible. And so you wrote this article where it showed the following is a summary of the 15 newspaper editorials we surveyed about their reaction to the first 6 months of the tenure of Pope Benedict and Pope Francis. So you're looking at it 6 months after. How does the media treat Benedict, the Rottweiler, versus this lovey-dovey Francis? And so, without again, I'm not quizzing you on it, but talk to us a little bit about how, I mean, you saw this very early. I mean, 6 months into his tenure, you were seeing something which caused you to sit down and write this.
Well, I think not just the secular press here, but too many people in the Catholic press didn't like Pope Benedict XVI. I remember what happened on the eve of Cardinal Ratzinger becoming Pope Benedict XVI. A very famous, the most famous liberal theologian at that time, Father Richard McBrien out of Notre Dame, said he'll never be made Pope, Ratzinger, because he gave this horrible speech to the cardinals talking about the dictatorship of relativism. They're never going to elect someone like him as Pope. The next day they did. But you see, they've got an agenda here. Not only did they want to promote the most left side of Pope Francis, which was already beginning to show when he went to Brazil and he said, let's make a mess of things. Well, some people said he did succeed in that goal. On the other hand, in order to make him look like the good guy, you have to have a bad guy. So the contrast was there. Benedict was the bad guy, and Francis is the good guy. They stayed away from John Paul II because too many people loved him. I do think there was a certain amount of anti-German animus that drove some of the prejudice against Ratzinger, against Pope Benedict XVI. But let me tell you something. I love John Paul II. He did not clean up the sexual abuse crisis.
No, he did not.
And it was not Francis. It was one man, Pope Benedict XVI. He did it when he was running the Congregation of Doctrine of the Faith under John Paul II, and he did it when he became Pope. He's the one who got rid of Maciel. He's the one who got rid of McCarrick. He's the one who made the changes. He's the one who said, listen, if you have deep-seated homosexual tendencies, the church is not the place for you to study for the priesthood. Okay? He didn't say if you happen to be gay, therefore you're out. If you could restrain yourself and put a lid on your libido, okay, that's different. But if you have deep-seated homosexual tendencies, this is not the place for you. I remember going on CNN with a very famous priest in America who's very much known as the LGBT priest. And he said that
I'll say it, Father James Martin.
Father James Martin, and he said that he basically said that all homosexuals were not welcome whatsoever. I said that's not true. That's not what he said. He said deep-seated homosexual tendencies. He was allowing for the fact that if a man could put the brace on his passions and he was a homosexual, then that's okay because nobody cares about that. If in other words, the question is chastity, whether you're straight or gay. The question is chastity.
Yeah.
And if you can, and if you're a straight guy and you can't put the lid on your libido, then you should leave too.
Right.
But so there was an intentional distortion by Father Martin on CNN, which I corrected him on air with Jake Tapper. And that needs to be said because too many people have an agenda out there. I'm only interested in one thing, the pursuit of truth. That's what the academy was about, the higher education. That's what the Catholic Church is about. That's what it stands for. That's what Jesus was asked about. What is truth? And everything else is beyond that. It is in second place. If you don't believe in truth, then you don't belong in the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is about the pursuit. It's not the pursuit of subjectivism. And I think the media had an agenda here. We got the bad guy with Benedict. Let's really blast him. And they're doing the same thing now, by the way. They did it with Biden and Trump. You could do the same thing. The media, first 100 days of Biden, he's off to a great start. First 100 days of Trump, he's done a lousy job. We have to be careful that we're not manipulated. Now, people say to me, well, how am I supposed to know who to trust? Like anything else, if you read a book review and it's by an author whom you trust, then put some faith in the book review. If there's a book review by someone whom you don't trust, you might want to go past it. In other words, it's built up over time. It takes time. We all wind up with a reputation if you're out there in the public world. And you have to do some work. Now, I understand I have a big advantage because I do it for a living.
Yeah.
As my whole background. The average person is involved in sales, they're teaching, they're driving a truck. They don't have the time. It's not that they're stupid. They just don't have the time. So I'm simply saying you have to understand there are certain sources. 10 books, obviously, and what you're doing here is reliable because you speak the truth. You have to be discerning. You just don't go to any restaurant, do you? You don't get everything you want. You have to be discerning. And I fault the media for this because I think that most of them knew exactly what they were doing.
Yeah, I think have you found in your dealings with the left, which of all people in America, you might be the most versed in dealing with the left and what their true agenda is. In fact, I was saying last night that you remind me of Rush Limbaugh in the sense that both of you guys have an ability to see what the real motive is of the left. What are they really getting at? You're not fooled by the surface statements that they make. You see what's really going on. So, Mike, I'm wondering do you think that the left, do they really understand that Catholic doctrine is not going to change? Or, because when I hear somebody say, I hope that the Pope changes, the teaching on women becoming priests, or I hope that the church changes their teaching on abortion. They say, sir, I hope the church changes their teaching on homosexuality. I wonder, do they even understand what we as Catholics actually believe, that these are unchanging truths? Do they know that? Does the left know that, or are they just trying to sow division within the church to weaken it? There's a distinction there, if that makes sense.
In some cases, they don't know it, but they think that they can make these changes. Let me be very specific. I've dealt with priests who are on the question of homosexuality who reject the church's teachings. They've told me right to my face. And to be explicit, they say we got to get rid of the language intrinsically disordered. Why would somebody think that's an attack on me, right, to say that I'm intrinsically disordered? They've been trying desperately with Pope Francis, and Father Martin just admitted we tried to get him to change on that.
Did he really?
Yes, he did. And there's others whom I know because I've told. And Martin wrote about it in the New York Times just recently. They want to get rid of that language, so it's stepwise. If we can get you to change the language there, be more inclusive. Don't speak negative. Welcome people in. Well, what are we welcoming? We don't do that with kleptomaniacs, do we? I mean, at some point, you see, this is the dilemma that Pope Francis was left with. Did he want to reach out to people who felt marginalized? Yes, okay. Some of these people have different sexual orientations and the like. But at the same time, it's tricky, isn't it? Because you don't want to be in the position of justifying the behavior. Because if the behavior runs contrary to Catholic Church's teachings, right, you can't do that.
Right.
So you want to welcome them without embrace. They want more than that. Let me tell you something. If you read the piece by Father Martin in the New York Times here a few weeks ago, he wasn't talking about us. He was that article was directed toward his friends in the LGBT community.
Yeah.
Because they were saying we didn't get enough. But you correctly said, do they understand there's certain things you can't change?
Right.
And I don't know if they care even about it. They keep thinking, if you got a guy like Francis, maybe we can get it. They came close, but they didn't get it. They didn't seal the deal. And if the next pope isn't just like Francis too, they're going to be furious.
Yeah, I guess that's my confusion is, I'm looking at the church from within as trying to be a faithful Catholic, and I believe that certain truths are just unchangeable. So why would I want to fight a war that I can't win? Like why would somebody, not me, but I mean, why would somebody want to fight a war they absolutely cannot win? There's no way that the left is going to convince the church to change their teaching on something like the divinity of Christ. I'm just taking like an ultimate teaching. So why even wage that war? At the same time, I think, as I'm thinking out loud here, Bill, it's because that's what prideful creatures do. I mean, Lucifer there's no way he thought he was actually going to beat God. There's just no way. He was too smart to know that. And yet he still tried. He still waged war. So even within the church, prideful men who know that the church, I mean, they're educated. I mean, James Martin is an educated man. He's had plenty of education, or I'm not just picking on him, but others who wage war against the church's teachings internally, especially. They have to know that the church proclaims that they're not going to change on certain things. The doctrine is not going to change. Dogma is not going to change. Disciplines, yeah. Procedures, yeah. But I think it's pride that must, just like the fallen angels, drives them to wage war even though they know they're going to lose.
Well, I think you said it very well. And I would say it's also true, unfortunately, of some nuns, because I've met them and I work with them. They would refer to traditionalist nuns as dead wood. And they wanted to change things, so they studied under Father McBrien at Notre Dame and the like. And they would tell you, well, we changed our ideas on slavery and whatnot and everything else, and we can change. Yes, there's a difference between doctrine and discipline. They know that too. Yeah. But they keep thinking if we can force it that way. They always like to talk about the spirit of Vatican II, because that's very elastic. Now it can mean anything that you want it to mean.
It's back to what you're saying about Marxists, which they perfect the art of vagueness,
right,
so that they can affirm or deny anything.
Right, and I find it deplorable. I mean, you've got a lot. I've actually had nuns, not just a few, who have come to me after a speech, and they say, "Bill, pray for me. I'm stuck with some women who are crazy. They don't believe a word that Jesus said." Mm-hmm. And yet they're still saying in here, one of the great ironies is too, I've known nuns who were out in a restaurant in habit with other nuns at the table who are not wearing habit. And then they get angry that a gentleman across the room picks up the tab for the one with the habit.
What do they expect?
What do they expect?
Come on.
There's an old joke about a nun without habit. She's in a bad area of a city. It's nighttime. This guy's coming behind her and she's getting a little bit uneasy. She runs up the block. She sees the cop. She says, "Oh, thank God you're a policeman, because I felt somebody was chasing me." And he says, "I'm a nun." And he said, "You're a nun?" He said, "How was I supposed to know you're a nun? You knew I was a policeman."
Right. On the flip side of that, we had a fascinating episode called The Silent Scandal. You would actually enjoy this episode. And we had the world expert. His name is Dr. Rob Warren from Catholic University. He got his PhD from Catholic University on basically financial malfeasance in the Catholic Church in America. And basically, he's done all the possible research on priest embezzlement cases, particularly pastors who embezzle money out of their churches. But there's a handful of religious sisters who embezzle from the schools they teach at or things like that. But what's fascinating is in his study of 100, he just took a sample of 100 to try to draw, connecting dots between why are people doing this. And by the way, the answer for priests is they're lonely. They're living alone, usually in small parishes. They have way too much opportunity. They have a chip on their shoulder that they haven't made good money. So there's reasons that he found that priests end up gambling usually and embezzling. Okay, it's interesting that most of these cases are gambling addictions that set in for lonely men. But here's my point in bringing it up. There's about 5 cases of religious sisters who embezzle, and it's because they develop gambling addictions. But nuns aren't gambling on sports. They're going to the casinos and gambling. But here's an interesting little thread. Of course, none of the nuns in the study wore habits. Can you imagine a full habited sister going to the Indian reservation casino and gambling hundreds of thousands of dollars away of the schools on the school's credit card? But the nuns without the habits were doing that. I mean, it's just an interesting thing. They pick up the tab for the nun in the habit. The cop's going to be less likely. And if they're not wearing habits, they can, it's more easy just to get in trouble, so it's just an interesting thing. I thought that was fun.
No, I have met, I don't want to mention her name. She was married to a very famous person. She was a nun before, and she left and she married this person. And she said, I left. She said, I ran my husband. The best thing that ever happened to me. The reason I left, I never lost my vocation. The woman I was with lost their vocation, and I just couldn't stand being with them anymore. Now, admittedly, this was much worse back in the late 60s, 70s, 80s, and the like. Things have, and then we have great Sisters of Life, the Dominican Sisters, Mother of the Eucharist. There's so many great orders of nuns.
There's a resurgence.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But why would a woman want to give up the joy of having a family if her whole goal in life to be a social worker?
Social worker.
You know what I mean? And that's the essence of it.
Yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in our section on like the attacks on tradition and the resurgence of tradition, because I think the next pope's going to have a major task before him. But a couple things here. In terms of a little bit more on this sexuality and gender ideology, which was a major issue during his tenure as pope, his pontificate. What about the German bishops? You wrote an article just the other day about how the German bishops have even taken their language a little bit further. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, we're one church, but on the one hand, you've got the bishops in Nigeria, and on the other hand, you've got the bishops in Germany. And they're like wildly two different polar opposites.
Yeah.
Tremendous fidelity to the church's teachings in Africa in general. Even Pope Francis, while he did kind of egg them on to become more, quote, progressive, even he realized that they'd gone too far. When he tried to pull them back to the center, he got resistance. And now it's out there again. Now the German Bishops' Conference, not just one bishop, the German Bishops' Conference, are talking about different sexual orientations and the multiplicity of gender identities. I want to know who they are and what are they. I'm tired of this LGBTQI plus. Who are these people?
Right.
This is all madness. Sex is binary. You're either male or female. Now, you may want to consider yourself to be something else. That's fine, but now we're living in the world of the Twilight Zone. I'm talking about reality here. Your DNA determines who you are. And I object to the idea that your sex is assigned at birth. No, it's not assigned at birth. Your father and your father alone determines your sex. Yeah. I'm a sociologist. I'm not a biologist, but this is biology 101. All right? And so, and why do they don't have, gender reveal parties and whatnot? What isn't that testimony to the fact that you already know the sex of the baby? That's there at conception. It's not there later than that. Yeah. And we're it's so funny to me because traditional Catholics are always told that we don't believe in science and whatnot. We believe in science. They, the secular militants, are the ones who reject science. We know that life begins at conception. We know that sex is binary. You guys are the ones who are saying that life doesn't begin at conception. You're the ones who say that there are 59 different genders and the like. And so they are anti-science. They're anti-common sense. And I think ultimately the people will prevail because the only ones who believe this nonsense are the elites, which is really strange when you think of it. The people who spent the most years in school, I'm almost tempted to call them well-educated, but I didn't. But you're not really. They're more like well-schooled. The longer they stay in school, the more corrupt their thinking becomes because it's not a matter of education; it's a matter of indoctrination. And they all teach from the same template. It's so easy to think what they're going to say next when it comes out of their mouth. I mean, there was a fellow, Howard Rosenberg, he talked about these intellectuals, that they're a herd of independent thinkers. I like that term, a herd of independent thinkers. Yeah. If you're an independent thinker, there's no place for you in the academy. The one diversity that really should matter in higher education is the one that doesn't exist, diversity of thought. They're worried about ancestry and anatomy. No. What about diversity of thought? We have a monoculture of thinking that takes place in education and not just in the elite institutions. So if you really believe in diversity, go back to the original meaning of higher education, which is the pursuit of truth, not politics.
The German bishops recently published some kind of document, handout, blessings for couples who love each other, and it says, the handout speaks of, and I'm quoting from your article, the handout speaks to extending blessings to, quote, couples in all the diversity of sexual orientations and gender identities that are part of our society. Mm-hmm. This is the German bishops. Is that like the USCCB for Germany? Is that what that is?
Yes, it is. And, and they're state funded, though. That's a little different over there.
Yeah.
But the idea that, if you really believe that, you don't believe in the teachings of the Catholic Church. Now, I think Pope Francis deserves some blame for egging them on this way. But to his credit, he realized they had gone so far. I don't know why he wouldn't think they wouldn't go any further. And when he tried to rein them back, he got resistance. So they really have to make a serious decision, the Germans. Are you with us or not? Now, we have great people like Gerhard Müller. He's fantastic. And of course, we had Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI. There's some great German clerics. But unfortunately, Reinhard Marx and a number of the others, now the conference itself, I don't know where they want to go with this. Is
Marx a cardinal?
Yes.
So he's in the conclave right now.
Yes, he is. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. So, I don't know what it is about the German bishops, but they seem to, I do wonder, is it possible that they will just like split off and be a schismatic group?
Well, it happened before in Germany so they could go the way of Luther. You do have to make up your mind. Leaving aside the fact that you should follow truth, and we're traditionalists, so it's easy for us to say that.
Right.
Just look at it sociologically for a second. Who's gaining adherence to the Catholic Church? It's those dioceses and those orders of priests and nuns that are the most orthodox.
Yeah.
Who's losing? The, quote, more progressive ones amongst them, particularly the nuns who have been decimated. Who's winning amongst the Jews? It's the Orthodox Jews, not the conservative, not the Reform. Who's losing in the Protestant church? It's the mainline Protestants.
Yeah.
Who's holding their own? The evangelical.
Yeah.
Who's the same thing is true in the Catholic Church. Where are young people going? They're going to the Latin Mass. Yeah. So, if you want to be increasingly relevant, meaning that the teachings of the church should mirror that of the editorial board of the New York Times and the Washington Post, that's a recipe for suicide.
Yeah.
Not only is it wrong in terms of truth, it's a recipe for suicide. So that's why the Africans are thriving and the Germans are dying in the church in terms of attendance, because the Africans believe what the word of God is, and too many people in the West have adopted militant secular ideas.
I guess this is like a rhetorical question, but I guess there's a lot of those when like-minded people are talking together. But why is somebody like Bishop Strickland removed, but the German bishops seem untouchable?
There seems to be, on the part of Pope Francis, there was a certain animus against the most orthodox among us. I think that to give him the benefit of doubt, I think he associated orthodoxy with elitism. I don't. I know there are some Orthodox who tend to be very elitist and the like, and all the regalia and pomp and circumstance, maybe to extremes. And I think he made that kind of association. He didn't distinguish some things. A lot of things got lumped in the mind of Pope Francis, I think. And now the German bishops, I think he liked the idea of being inclusive. Again, that's a trap, though. In every human community is based on exclusivity, not inclusivity. Now, do we want to welcome people? Yes, everybody is welcome into the Catholic Church, but we have house rules. Every church has house rules. Little League has house rules. Restaurants and hotels have house rules. Why is this so shocking? When Catholics tell me, I can't believe a priest wouldn't allow me to get married on the beach. Well, we have house rules.
Yeah.
Don't you in your own home? You can always, if you can do like the Protestants do, just keep shopping. You can just go, I always say that if you want to join some of the mainline denominations, don't walk down the street, run, because there may not be anybody there by the time you get there. Take a look at the numbers in the Episcopal Church, the Lutherans, the Methodists, the Presbyterians. They're losing members because the more they try to mimic the dominant culture, the less relevant they become. Why would a young man or woman want to give up the joys of family life for what? If everything you're going to teach and do is that what you could do as a social worker or as a teacher or as a therapist. And so it's got to be something special. If you're going to give that up, it has to be something special.
Are you familiar with Captain Shackleton from the famous Arctic ship called the Endurance?
I've read part of it.
Oh, okay. So there's a great story there.
Yeah. No, it's
but here's the interesting part there. Captain Shackleton put an ad out in the paper trying to recruit men to come work this expedition. And we could probably find it and show it, but that's all right. We don't have to do that. But it's very easily found on Google. And the ad basically says, calling all men who are courageous, fearless, working for terrible wages in freezing cold, facing, dangerous conditions, deadly animals in the Arctic, chance of survival slim, but chance of honor certain, or something like that. And it was like, in one sense, the worst ad for a job ever. And he was flooded with applicants. Flooded. Why? Why do young men want to join the SEAL Team 6? Why do they want to go through Hell Week? It's called Hell Week. Why do you want to do that? Why did young men want to become Jesuits in the old days and go out into the missionary fields when you had probably a 50% chance of being tortured and martyred? Why did you do these? And it's that same idea that in our lackadaisical everyday life, young men and women see something different than the mind-numbing everyday activity that we just go through as sheep following whatever pop culture tells us to do. You see something beautiful and traditional and difficult. And the fact that it's difficult even makes you think that it has a greater value. It's hard to get there. That's why the stories of the saints and the heroes of the church have inspired people for 2,000 years. That's why we travel through catacombs to look at bones of people who were tortured by Romans. That's why the church has always done that. And yet, that's why, in a very simplified way, that's why when young people today are looking at something mysterious and elevated and transcendent like the Latin Mass or the traditional devotions of the church or the difficult doctrines to live by sometimes, the difficult sexual ethics that we have, the difficult demands of confession and penance, we see something worthy of our best effort as opposed to something dumbed down to the lowest common denominator in society. And so when Catholics look at the quote-unquote tradition, which is a catch-all phrase for everything I'm saying, we are inspired and we're willing to put our all into it. The left should not be surprised why this younger generation that has been raised, in America at least, in a life of luxury and constant self-indulgence, when we see the beauties of tradition calling us out of our sleepiness in society, calling us to be our absolute best selves by the grace of God, they should not be surprised that the traditional religious sisters are booming. They have a vocational crisis, Bill, because they can't house all their vocations. They have to build new buildings. The Sisters of Mercy down the street, which lost their ways in the 60s and burned their habits and educated me in elementary school, they have to lease out all their buildings. They have to sell off their hospitals just to pay their medical bills for all the old people they have because they have no young sisters to do anything. They've lost their way. They became nothing but social workers. Traditional liturgies, if the parish has, even if a beautiful Novus Ordo is there, not even a Latin, just a beautiful Novus Ordo, the young families with like 3 strollers are barging in through the doors to try to find, we don't even have pews enough to fit these families. And yet the people, the parishes that have just gone soft and lazy and are basically bad evangelical services with the Holy Presence in the middle of it, of course, but bad evangelical services, they can't pay their bills. They're consolidating their parishes because they can't pay their bills. So the statistics are so perfectly clear that this next generation has tremendous hope. We desire tradition so much. Why? Because it's so radically different from this messed up, weak, dumb, self-indulgent society that we've all been raised in.
I couldn't improve on that. That
Sorry.
was magnificent.
No. It was just
No. You hit it out of the park on that one. You really did.
Tan Books is here to help you become a saint. That's why we do everything we do. We publish thousands of titles, literally, that are specifically written to help you get to heaven. Everything from the lives of the saints to the writings of the saints, the greatest doctors of the church, the great spiritual masters, Alphonsus Liguori, St. Francis de Sales, and so on. So please come to tanbooks.com and find the book that God wants you to have right now so that you can get to heaven and be a saint for eternity.
Apropos what you're saying, it does bother me when Pope Francis was talking about Pachamama and basically pagan ritual there at the Vatican. Look, if the Catholic Church is special, then you can't try to be everything to everybody. You have a set of teachings and principles, and people have to be gravitated to it. Religious indifferentism is what happens when you say all religions are equal. All religions are not equal. If that's the case, why would you have any missionaries?
Yes.
Why would you even bother? When I worked in Spanish Harlem, a very dangerous neighborhood back in the 1970s, most of the people I found out who were teaching there and the principal were all ex-brothers, priests, or nuns. I didn't know that. And they said to me, Bill, we're like missionaries. And at first I didn't quite register because I thought of missionaries, somebody's overseas someplace. But no, we were working with some kids who were ill-served, who didn't have any fathers, and who were a very dangerous neighborhood. They closed the public school down across the street. But the mothers believed in something, and they wanted something special for their kids. And so if you begin to take this inclusive idea that we have to be open up to every idea and they're all equal, that hierarchy is what society is based on. Yeah. It begins in the family. Yeah. The parents should have more authority than the children. The priest should have more authority than the layperson. The teacher should have more authority. The policeman should have more authority. Now, I don't like authoritarianism, but authoritativeness is simply the proper exercise of authority. But we seem to think that it's somehow it's a dirty word unless everybody gets an equal chance. No, the people who really grow and are creative in our society are always the people who were steeped in tradition and they understood logical thinking. We're not doing a service to people if we try to say that everybody is equal. Radical egalitarianism doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you have such a keen understanding of the mind of the liberal. And one of the things that strikes me all the time, whether it's in politics or in the church, is this built-in contradiction that they have in their ideology. And it's that, why is it that the most tyrannical governments are actually the socialist governments? I mean, that's the contradiction right there. And so take, for example, in the church, when the Pope, the past Pope, former Pope now, we have to remember to say, the former Pope, Pope Francis, he pushed and pushed and pushed this like notion of synodality and tolerance, okay? He pushed it so hard, and yet he was, by any measure, the most authoritative Pope that we've had in recent memory. I don't know who would be more authoritative, and you might say tyrannical. I mean, he fired bishops in a way that Benedict and John Paul II and never did, okay? But he preached and preached synodality. There's something built into the contradiction of liberalism that says we're going to welcome all. Oh, but if you don't buy into our welcoming of everybody completely, we're going to crush you. And that's where the whole cancel culture comes from. In fact, I'm just going to go on for a second about Bishop Strickland, because I interviewed him and got to know him, really studied his case extensively. And Bill, I've noticed that a lot of people, when thinking about his situation, and a lot of good well-meaning priests that I know, they'll think about the Strickland case. Now, the reason I'm going through this, Bill, is it goes to the heart of liberalism, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And they'll say, when they're thinking about the Strickland case, they'll say, yeah, and they always do that. They always make it look like they're really thinking, yeah, he may have stepped a little too far. He may have gone a little too far in what he said. That's what it is. So my point is, I think you've asked the wrong question. Instead of asking whether Bishop Strickland went a little too far, which I'm not saying he did at all. I am not saying he did. But instead of asking, did he go a little too far, why don't you ask one of two questions? One, if he did go a little too far, why is he completely and totally canceled? Why is he thrown to the ash heap of the church? He's never going to say Mass in a proper sanctuary again. Okay? Bishops won't communicate with him at all. He is exiled. Like you read the old saints of the church, Athanasius in the early church, exiled. You hear about all these people that were exiled. He's been exiled. And I've been to his little hermitage where he's exiled to, and he's actually quite happy. But so one question that the left should ask themselves, why, if he just went a little too far, why was he totally and completely exiled? The second question, Bill, that they should be asking is, if he went just a little too far, did anyone else come anywhere close enough to going far enough? No one said, no other bishop has, very few, have challenged Pope Francis's statements, hardly at all. So I don't think the question is if somebody like, just as an example, Bishop Strickland going a little too far. The question is, why was he completely canceled? And secondly, did anyone else go far enough? I find that the left has an obsession with completely deleting you, which is the least tolerant attitude they could possibly have, and they're supposed to be the bastions of tolerance.
I can answer that as a sociologist, and I've written about it. Excellent question. You laid it out very nicely. If I had to say in one word, what is it that animates the left in and out of the church, it would be power or control. That's what animates them. They, because of pride, they're convinced that their thinking is right. They don't need to consult with you. They don't need to consult with me. They know we're wrong. And if we don't fall in line, then we have to suffer the consequences. This is what's happened traditionally. Every totalitarian regime in history has been on the left. People say, well, you're fighting about Hitler. He's on the right. No, he was not on the right. If you're a conservative, you believe in limited government.
Yes.
Hitler didn't believe in limited government, and that's why I call it the National Socialist Party as
that's
well.
Right. People missed that point.
That point.
Yeah.
No, we're the ones who believe, as the founders did, that to counter ambition, as Madison and Jefferson understood, you had to have different branches of government. You had to have, you'd have to have also a federalist system, state, local, and federal. Because if you concentrate power, that's the prescription for dictatorship. They lived under that, and they didn't want any more of that. So they divided power against power, ambition against ambition. So you write the laws, you interpret the laws, and you're the ones who enforce the laws. So, but the left doesn't believe in that. They believe that they're so right and righteous that they don't need to consult with anybody. Yeah. And so someone like Strickland is really a threat, because if he gains more ground, then more and more people will go his way. So they're not interested in talking to him and maybe having a kind of fraternal correction, so to speak. And I'm not even saying they should have. I'm just saying that would be the normal way of doing it. No, he's got to be canceled. That's how insecure they are also.
Yeah.
Now, there's an awful lot of bishops out there and cardinals who I've learned from different quarters apparently do feel similar to Bishop Strickland in many matters, but maybe they're a little bit quiet at this point because they're afraid of being canceled. But now we're coming on the eve of the election of the new pope, and you get behind closed doors, so to speak, things can change.
Things can change, absolutely. Now, one of the things that I struggle with is, of course, I struggle with it, the crackdown on the Latin Mass. Okay, now I go to Latin Mass some. I love taking my family. I love getting my kids exposed to it. I love it myself. But most of the time I go to a traditional Novus Ordo, a beautiful Novus Ordo. So I'm not a rad trad, for lack of a better word. I'm not a anti-Novus Ordo guy, okay? But trying to understand Pope Francis's mindset here, okay? So just a little background. In 2007, Benedict wrote Summorum Pontificum, where he essentially did state that the Latin Mass was never canceled. The Latin Mass was never made unavailable to priests. We've just kind of screwed up this whole thought process, and priests have access to this, and they have a right to say it. They've always had the right to say it. And I think one of the main points of that encyclical was it's not Benedict giving them the right to say it. It's that the right was always there. Mm-hmm. And then fast forward to 2021, Traditionis Custodes, which, interesting, they named it the Defender of Tradition, which is an interesting name for this document. Pope Francis is saying, no, you don't have a right to say this. You have to get permission to say it. So if I was a liberal trying to understand this, perhaps I'd just be happy that the Latin Mass is being, oppressed. But what we have here really isn't one pope giving us permission and another pope taking permission away. That I can understand kind of that. But that's not what's happened with this bill. You have one pope saying, I don't have to give you permission. And you have another pope saying, I have to give you permission. That's the difference. And are we supposed to really believe, like what person out there really believes that Bergoglio was a more educated man understanding the theology of the liturgy and the and canon law on this subject and the authority of the papacy more so than the brilliant, well-trained scholar Ratzinger? Because we have here not two different disciplines. We have here two different understandings of the theology of what rights priests have in regards to the liturgy. That's a huge difference. So Francis had no problem just saying, nope, Benedict was wrong and I'm right. And I just don't know how anybody could trust Francis when he's going up against a total intellectual giant like Benedict was.
Well said again. I think in the mind of Francis, he looked at people attracted to the Latin Mass as a ghetto.
Yeah.
And he felt that we're never going to get these people to buy into the inclusive agenda, which I'm trying to foster with regard to women and deacons and homosexuals and same-sex couples and the like. So just as one example, if we can basically destroy them, then we will have made some inroads. But again, it speaks to their insecurity. It also speaks to the authoritarian agenda of Pope Francis. I mean, he's the one who told the bishops, you have no authority to create new religious orders. You've got to come through me. He took over the Pontifical Academy of Life and Marriage and Family and the John Paul II Institute. But tyranny is the staple of the left. That's their whole hallmark in history. Because again, they're so convinced that they're right and we're wrong. Tolerance means to put up with. It doesn't mean to affirm. And we should have tolerance of people. I don't need to affirm anything, but I think this speaks. And in terms of the understanding of the liturgy, look, we were blessed. I mean, in my lifetime, John Paul II, intellectual giant, Benedict XVI, intellectual giant. I mean, even the people who are the Francis devotees, I don't think would ever regard him as a first-class intellectual. No, and so there's that there as well. But I always say, the people in the pews are the ones who are the most loyal servants. They're the ones who also pay the bills, which is not unimportant.
Yeah.
It's not the ones who are out there like the dissidents who don't go to church at all and not paying any bills. So even on the practical level, why would you pay so much attention to people who, as soon as they get what they want, they're going to cut and run, and they're going to leave you what with an empty church?
And I don't. In terms of the empty church, the left are not having children.
No,
their children are not staying. And statistically speaking, okay. I mean, I'm not using hyperbole. I mean, we could pull up stats. It's very. In fact, something I really want to do at TAN, and you would love this. I should get you to write the introduction to this or something. But maybe TAN and the Catholic League could, collaborate on this. But I want to do an infographic book about the Catholic Church, showing, you see these infographics where you see like the numbers of things, growing real fast, or the numbers of things shrinking real fast. I would love to do an infographic book showing the trends of the more traditional strain of Catholicism, and then modernist Catholicism
Right.
is showing the shrinkage or the growth. That'd be kind of a fun book to look through. But, vocations alone, just talk about vocations. I mean, does a bishop not want to have more priests being ordained? I mean, just from a pure logistic, you could be an atheist. And if you are a bishop in America and you need donations and you need priests to fill to stack the altar, you're going to have to be more traditional to get vocations. The left has no vocations. I don't know why they don't see that. They're self-defeating. That's what drives me bonkers, Bill, is they're self-defeating.
Well, in one sense, if there's a death wish here, quite frankly, I mean, they're sabotaging themselves. Everybody knows that progressivism fails, heterodoxy fails, orthodoxy wins, and we've seen that over and over again. Again, not just with our religion, but even with other religions. People want something to believe in, something tangible. They don't, and not the pablum that we're offered. When I listen to a homily from a priest, I want to get something. I want to learn something. I want to be inspired. And if all he's going to do is talk to me about something that it sounds like I just heard it on MSNBC or something, what's the special about that? We have truth on our side.
Yeah.
We have the richness of tradition. We have the teachings of the fathers. Why are we today so interested? Some people, not all people, obviously, we're talking about that progressive wing of the Catholic Church. Why are they so committed to ideas which they're intellectually bankrupt?
They fail.
And they don't work.
They
don't touch people. They certainly don't liberate. That's for certain.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, in terms of let's change a little bit to we've mentioned a little bit, but the anti-Americanism, anti-West, perhaps even, but like there was I don't know how else to say it. I'm trying to be respectful to the man, but Pope Francis seemed to hate America. I don't know what else to say. I don't know how else to say it, but at every turn, he seemed to condemn free market capitalism. He seemed to hate Donald Trump's immigration policy, but Bernie Sanders would have an open ticket into the Vatican. Where did this, and we've published some on it, but from your standpoint, where did this anti-American rhetoric and hostility towards Catholicism come from? Now, we've talked about him being a South American Jesuit, but let's build on that a little bit.
I think I can give you a good sociological answer on that. When I was studying for my PhD, you had to declare yourself to give the oral exam, have some expertise in 3 subjects. And for me, it was political sociology, social stratification, the study of inequality, and also social change. Now, within the area of social change, my particular interest was Latin America. And I've kind of moved away from it, but that was when I was a young man. And I studied under Argentinian Marxist. The reason I know the left so well is because they were trained. I mean, I got a degree in sociology. It's not exactly a conservative field. It's not economics, which has some degree of a strain of conservatism. When you study Latin America through the lens of a Marxist, and I learned it from these men, they believe, and this explains the mindset of Pope Francis, that to understand the developing world, Latin America, and the developed world, North America, you have to understand that North America became rich by exploiting the poor to the South. And in other words, it was all a matter of structural changes and the decisions reached in New York and Chicago and Washington and LA that had a deleterious effect on the economy of the developing world. I took the position, I understood that, I had to because I had to take the classes. I was drawn to the work of a David McClellan out of Harvard, who was a psychologist who also studied Latin America. I was drawn to his understanding, which is to emphasize not these political structures, but the culture. Now, what is it about the culture that made them so different? On the one hand, it's something very nice about Latin American culture that the economy was built to a large extent, not as much today, family-based. So that's wonderful.
Yeah,
except that if your brother Juan is a slackard, you can't ever get rid of them, can you?
Mm.
And so nepotism became a severe problem there. And my point is that I took the position that you could understand why they were so developing and never seemed to be developed more by the cultural explanation. I got resistance from my professors who were teaching me, but most of them were pretty fair to me about that. I said, look, let's just take a look at Mexico. It's rich with natural resources, with oil. They're surrounded by water. Look at the work ethic of the Hispanics in this country. I'd say they're number one. Yeah. They're incredible. Yeah. They do everything. Why is it that Mexico then should be richer than the United States? You've got natural resources, you've got human resources, because the government there is corrupt and whatnot, but you also have cultural elements there which kind of work against a model of efficiency. On the other hand, I want to hasten to say this. While it's good to have a little bit more individualism, radical individualism is something which is a problem, and it's a problem in the United States. So I don't want to be misinterpreted. People say, "Oh, Bill, you want to break up the family?" No, I don't. I'm all in favor of the family. I'm simply saying that you've got to also, if you have an economic model, it just can't be dependent on an extended family. You've got to go beyond that. I'm always careful with the Catholic League not to hire somebody who's a family member or somebody who's a close friend. It doesn't work because if that person is not doing his or her job, it makes my decision impossible. It's better to be one step removed. Radical individualism in our culture, I've written books about it, is a problem. So I don't want to ever be mistaken. Like any good thing, if you take it to extremes, you pervert it.
Yeah.
I like steak. You have too much of it, you're going to sour the stomach. You know, it's common sense again.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that shows the original kind of ideology of Latin America that Bergoglio grew up in, and so you've read and thought a little bit about those early influences on Bergoglio's thinking that had a significant impact on him when he was Pope Francis. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Right. I mean, one of the persons who had a great deal of influence, he said the greatest influence on him as a young man in terms of his politics was Esther Balestrino. Now, her name won't mean anything to anybody. It doesn't really mean anything to me. She was an atheist communist. She introduced Francis to all the communist literature, which he loved. This is not Bill Donohue's interpretation. I want people to understand this. If you have any doubts, read what Pope Francis himself said in his autobiography. It's not really an autobiography, the book that came out here not too long ago. And he goes through this. It's more of a Q&A with people in the book. And he says that Esther Balestrino, this atheist communist, had affected him more than anything else.
This is like him saying the person who influenced me the most was Lenin. I mean, it's like saying that, right? I mean, that's the kind of ideology school.
Right, and you get this kind of liberation theology, which is more Marxist than it is the gospel, let's face it. And again, if you have this kind of prejudice against the West because you believe that the people are poor because the other people are rich, no. Rich people in this country are not making poor people poor. If we come up with a good economic model, which we have, they're increasing, they're ameliorating their condition. There's a reason why people keep crashing our borders.
Yeah.
From developing countries. They want to be a part of our country. Obviously, we want to make sure that they're done legally. Now, here we have a kind of a false compassion. We have seemingly, in some quarters of America, more compassion for the people who violate the laws, who come into our country, crash the borders, and then avail themselves of all kinds of services. What about the victims of some of the people, not all of them, but some of the people who crashed our borders and what they've done to them in the workplace and in terms of behavior, in terms of crime?
Yeah.
Where is the compassion for that? Where's their due process for those people? So, you know, when the compassion is only on one side, and it's on the side of the person who's already violated our own laws, I have to begin to wonder what's going on here.
I don't understand. Another, to be friendly, a confusion. So during COVID, Pope Francis locks down the Vatican, and unless you have a vaccine card, you can't get into the Vatican. And at the same time, he's telling Donald Trump to keep the borders open. So how do you What the heck is that?
Well, what is it that last December the Vatican made it much more difficult to get in there into the Vatican without permission, and they came in with draconian sanctions.
Yeah.
So you're protecting your borders.
Yeah, protecting
in fact, you
borders.
strengthen them.
Right. But no, you can have 10 million people come in from the southern border without a vaccine.
Yeah.
So what is his, again, intellectually, ideologically, spiritually, what was going on in the mind of Pope Francis that made him so hostile to Donald Trump's immigration policy? He did not want America to have a border. What do you do with that? Like, how can that why would he fight that battle? What was his motive? Did he really expect us to just have open borders? Is that, if you were to sit down and talk to the guy, would you say, you really want us just to have open borders?
There's an imprecision in the thought, to be kind, but let's face it too. A lot of people, and this includes a lot of priests. I mentioned to you over dinner that one time I went to see Cardinal O'Connor, and I was in a bad mood, and he said, "What's the matter, Bill?" And I said, "Well, what's wrong with a lot of priests?" I said, "Did they stand for anything anymore?" He said, "They want to be liked." I said, "Well, I want to be liked too, but I want to be respected first." We know who writes the obituaries in the New York Times and Washington Post, and who affect history and the biographies. They're all on the left.
Yeah.
This weighs on a lot of people because they are concerned about their legacy, and they are concerned about how they're treated in the media. It takes a very thick-skinned person like Donald Trump, I think I have some of that, where you don't mind being bashed. I mean, if I'm here to tell the truth, if that's what I'm on earth for, to do the best I can, to profess an allegiance to Catholicism and get other people to understand its wisdom, then am I going to be bashed? Well, Jesus told us that you would be.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I understand why people say, listen, maybe I don't want to do what Donohue does. That's fine. I'm not saying you should want to be me. I'm just simply saying that why is it that people are so concerned about being loved by other people? You're not loved by them anyhow. They're using you. Yeah. That's part of the game too. You'll get good press out of it. I don't care if I get good press.
I want God to write my obituary, and he's going to.
Yeah,
and so
right.
I care if he likes me. But I do wonder, I mean, Pope Francis must have thought through somewhat the immigration issue. I really wish I could understand what he expects a country like America to do. And I can't help but wonder, is he just a raw, unadulterated, unbridled globalist that really would like, no passports and just, just open like one big world country? I don't know if that's the case. I can't believe he'd go that far. But is that what some of these globalists want?
Do you want to bring order and clarity back into your family life? Hey, I got 16 kids and I understand better than anyone we need to do that. So my wife and I, Ashley, we developed a 6-part family management system to do just that. And it's based on concrete business tools and principles that you can apply in the day-to-day running of your household. So please come to wellorderedfamily.com, check out our tools, our books, and most importantly, our one-on-one coaching so that we can work directly with you and customize a program to help your family get to the next level.
Let's just flip it just for a second. Let's say instead of relatively poor Hispanics coming from the South, crashing our borders, it's affluent Canadians crashing our border from the North. Would the Pope be as sympathetic to them? I don't know that he would. I think a lot of it's driven by this dependency theory again, that the rich made the poor poor, and that this is our way of getting back what we did. It's kind of a retribution. That's what it is. That's really what it is. Reparations, retribution. That's what it really is.
It's reparations. Free citizenship.
Yeah. I don't think he'd be too sympathetic to the affluent Canadians coming in. I think he'd say, America, you might have a chance a right to protect your borders.
Yeah.
But for some reason, they come from the South.
That's smart. That's smart. I was looking for an honest intellectual underpinning there, and I think that's what it is. It's not about per se borders. It's actually his sympathy for the poor, and he sees free citizenship as some kind of reparation. I bet you there's a lot of truth. My mind can go there. Now, on that point, it's a great segue. You wrote an article entitled "The Pope's Idea of Poor Migrants is Flawed," where you spoke about the Pope pushes a certain image of these poor wretches lacking in possessions, but it's more than that. And so can you talk a little bit about how he may have seen the immigrants maybe in a flawed manner?
Well, I don't know that the Pope is aware that when these people are waiting to come into this country, they're given cell phones and they're told where they can sign up for welfare in the United States. I'm not sure how much he knew about this. Not all these people, they came in with their phones, they came in with all kinds of baggage. Let's face it, the poorest of the poor never migrate. They never have in history because they don't have even the physical ability to do it.
Interesting.
They don't have the ability to do it. They just stuck right where they're at. It's always those who are a step above who might want a better life. I'm not saying that they didn't, but we're not talking about the poorest of the poor here.
Right.
And how much of what the Pope was given in terms of basically ideological information, I mean, propaganda, quite frankly, fed by the left, he was surrounded by some of those people. We know that. There's no question that the people surrounded, and the fellow was from Honduras, Madriaga, and others, and then Fernandez. These are men on the left. There's no question about it. We talked earlier about in the question of homosexuality, people like Father Martin and whatnot. So, if you depend on a small circle of advisors, and we begin to find out who they are, and you're not known as an independent thinker, I must say that in the first place, then that becomes a problem. He never got the diversity of thought from his advisors that I think he deserved.
Yeah.
In the case of Benedict and John Paul II, they were towering intellectuals, so they didn't need as much. They already had the variety of thought in the past.
Yeah.
So I think to some extent he was duped.
Yeah.
And that's being kind about it.
Right. Now, kind of moving on to what the next pope is going to contend with, the next pope will be elected soon. What do you think when he comes into the church, what do you think his mindset's? I mean, depending on who it is, but I mean, when he comes and looks at the landscape of issues post-Francis, what do you think he's going to be looking at?
Well, I don't think we're going to get Francis II. I know that 80% of the cardinals going to vote for the next pope were appointed by Pope Francis, and some people logically conclude, therefore we'll get Francis II. From what I can gather, there's a sense amongst most of the cardinals who will vote that the pendulum needs to get back to the middle.
Yeah.
That means that it's got to go in a more traditional fashion. It can't stay where it's at. It can't go to the left. There's too much confusion. When Pope Francis had to give in to the entire continent of Africa, the entire continent, because Obongo out of the Congo represented the African bishops and said, we don't go along with the idea of blessing same-sex couples, all right? We know what that means. Yeah. We're not going to go for it. He had to yield and said, okay, that's your culture, it's different. Wait. I think there's a recognition that this has alienated too many people. And again, we need clarity. There's so much moral confusion in the Catholic Church today. Then when you have people like Cardinal Dolan, who have mentioned it now in public here, right after the Pope had passed away, people who might have been a little bit reluctant to say that because it might have been looked upon as being too critical, they're now realizing we've got to do something. I don't know who we're going to get. I do think that someone is going to recognize that we've got to bring it back to a more traditional strain. Otherwise, we're going to alienate the very people who are the heart and soul of the Catholic Church.
You had a great insight that the conclave being delayed a couple days kind of works in favor of the more traditional bishops. That's a great dynamic. Talk about that.
There's no question that the people who like the more progressive strain within the Catholic Church, they tend to be from North America and Europe overwhelmingly. They know each other already. They've been there for a long time. What Francis did was he appointed a lot of cardinals from what they call the peripheries, faraway places in Asia and Africa, in nations we would have a hard time pronouncing even the names of these nations. Yeah. These men have not met each other. They don't know each other. But they didn't become a priest because of woke politics.
Yes.
They became a priest because they felt they had a calling. Pope Francis may have appointed them, but I'll bet you in most cases they are traditionalists. There aren't too many progressives out there in these peripheries. So now the big problem is they've got to get a chance to meet each other. It begins now. And this entire week, they'll have the run of the week to meet each other and socially and then intellectually and through discussion. We had heard word that the conclave was going to begin on May the 5th, on Monday, and then it was May the 6th. Now it's Wednesday the 7th. Why does that matter? It gives an extra few days to the people who are the traditionalists who don't know each other to get to know each other and to rally around a small number of people, as the progressives will on the other side, so that we can come together. I think this favors us.
It's a fascinating point. I mean, I just love thinking about the inner dynamics, the logistics. Okay, so you have, first of all, I think it's kind of poetic justice or ironic, I don't know what the word would be, with the Pope's insistence on minorities and appointing people from the peripheries. What he ends up actually doing is something he probably didn't intend to do.
Could be unwitting.
Yeah, and so he does this, and because these people that come from these countries that know true suffering and destitution,
Yeah.
the wokeness of the West is just not on their radar because they're actually dealing with martyrs and people dying in the street. That's what they have to contend with. That's their pastoral work, as opposed to some Ivy League teenage girl who wants to change her gender.
Right.
You know, it's just a difference of like artificial reality versus reality. And so these cardinals from all corners of the earth, they're just by nature more traditional because they haven't been contaminated so much. You said it perfectly. But so these people, they're not hanging around on chat groups and they're not texting. No. You know, the cardinal from the Philippines isn't texting the cardinal from the Congo because they were just at the cocktail party yesterday in Germany. Like that's not what's happened, but that's exactly what's happened with the European cardinals.
Yes.
They live at cocktail parties. And so these extra couple days, an extra 48 hours.
That's important.
It's a huge difference because they're now at a super big cocktail party, you know, and they're going to be in their room. They're going to be eating dinner together. They're going to be walking through the halls. They're going to be sitting and talking, and they're going to say, yeah, you're from the Congo. I've heard about you. And they're going to, for the first time, get to know each other. And so it's that extra couple days is all the difference in the world.
I think it's a big plus for our side. And I think that if you just take a look at Africa again, I've not met him, but I've communicated with Cardinal Sarah, and I love him.
Yeah.
From Africa, but he's 79.
Yeah, he's too old.
This Obongo is 65. That's a big difference right there. Yeah. But yes, they're going to get a chance to meet each other this week, but then they get a chance to coalesce again on Monday and Tuesday of next week before they go into the conclave to vote on Wednesday the 7th.
So talk to me a little bit more. We kind of just did, but why is the church so solid in Africa and other far off places? I mean, I think it's the wokeness. Is it just take liberalism longer to get there? Is it that they physically suffer more? They have to fight for food. They have to fight to keep their faith. They have to fight for education. They have to walk uphill both ways with no shoes. You know, like the things that America used to have to struggle to do. Is it that they're still developing countries and so they just know suffering and so they understand the gospel message a little better and so wokeness just sounds silly to them? Why is Africa booming in every possible way in terms of Catholicism?
I think a lot of it has to do with the corrupting effects of affluence, quite frankly. In the 1950s, John Kenneth Galbraith wrote the book, The Affluent Society. It was after World War II. And the economy was doing very well. That was the heyday of the Catholic Church in the 1950s. And then everything changed. A radical cultural shift took place in the 1960s. Affluence tends to create a sense of complacency, of comfortableness, of interest in the individual, not in the family. It tends to attract narcissists. If you're in Africa, you've got to be worried about what we call in this country the kitchen table issues, except in a much more profound way.
Yeah.
It's only in well-educated and rich countries that you find a lot of men, and particularly women, who always have to make sure when their appointment is with their therapist, not just to take care of their nails.
Right.
Now, what do they need a therapist for? They don't. In Africa, you have to have therapy is born out of leisure. Yeah. You have to have a lot of extra time. People don't like me at work, and people on social media, I didn't get invited to the party. African people not worried about parties. They're worried about putting food on the table. They're worried about the basics. And they haven't been corrupted by higher education with these ideas of subjectivism, that there's no such thing as truth. What we've done in this country to young people, and I spent 20 years on the board of directors of the National Association of Scholars, a wonderful organization. We don't talk about Catholic things. We don't talk about abortion. We talk about the academy and what's happened. We believe in merit. We believe in Western civilization. They lean toward a very welcoming attitude toward the Catholic Church. If you believe in Western civilization, where did it come from?
Right.
But there's a lot of that. I think there's affluence is an invitation for laziness, and in Africa they don't understand.
The richest. I'm sorry, how to say this? The more wealthy the zip code, the more antidepressants are prescribed.
They're also the most leftist, by the way.
Yeah, no doubt.
In this country, they're most leftist. Yeah, there's no question about that.
But I mean, it shows that the wealth is not actually helping their happiness. I mean, it's just not. I mean,
look, when we were kids, if somebody had a problem, you bring in the priest, the minister, the rabbi. Now they bring in the sensitivity dog.
Yeah.
They bring in the therapist, and then they check their watch every 50 minutes to make sure do you have your MasterCard.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah.
The role of the cleric has been thrown to the curb, and they're bringing in these people, many of whom, by the way, struggle with their own problems. If you take a look at the suicide rate of psychiatrists, it's many times higher than that of the average person in this country.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of people go into these helping professions looking for self-help, and then they are giving advice to people who don't need that advice. It just exacerbates the situation.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Just to kind of begin the slow wrap up, do you think that when the new pope comes in, let's just assume that he is a little bit more conservative than Francis, and I think that's a good chance because of what you mentioned. What does he do? He comes in and he sees a mess. Does he fire everybody? Is his whole agenda kind of stuck because Pope Francis appointed so many cardinals, and so a new guy's not going to come and fire people? What does he just fix the curia? What does a new pope, if he wants to make changes, what's he facing?
It comes down to one word: courage. We may get someone who is more traditional and who will make some changes, but he's going to be attacked immediately by the media. He's going to be savaged by people. You're not in the legacy of Francis. He's going to be thrown up to him constantly, every single day. That's not what Francis wanted. It's not what Francis would do. Now, if you're a man of courage, you're going to say, I understand that, and I'm the new sergeant on the block, the new staff sergeant, the new sergeant at arms. I'm going to make some changes. So I think it comes down to that. I've met a lot of good priests and bishops who are intellectually and theologically sound, but they lack the courage of their convictions to say some things in public. And at that level, we need somebody who is bold enough to say it. Certainly Francis was, right? No one ever say that he was acting in a meek fashion. He spoke his mind, and if anything, he had this kind of authoritarian streak in him. I don't want authoritarianism, but if the Pope was elected to make some changes and to move it to the center, and you're not going to take command, then you're not doing us any good. We hope that the new Pope has the courage, not just simply good ideas.
Let's pretend for a second that the next Pope is in office, and on day one he's waving and blessing people. Day two he calls Dr. Donohue to the Vatican, right? He said,
I checked my phone. I said, he got the wrong number.
So he calls you in, and we're pretending, and he says, I need advice. What do you tell him?
I would recommend certain people like Cardinal Raymond Burke and others to whom he should repair to whom he should consult with for advice. Because I think part of the problem with Francis was that the people who surrounded him had an agenda, and it wasn't even in the best interest of him. So I think depending on who you get, you've got to have you shouldn't just be depending on people from your home country. Let's say you got an African. I would want them to reach out to other people. But people like Burke, I mention him only because I know him.
Yeah.
I think he's a great man.
He's a hero.
He's not only an intellectual, but he's got guts.
Yes.
So that would be my advice.
So my last question is, if the next pope if you wanted the next pope to have 3 virtues, I know first is courage, fortitude. I know that one. Give me 2 more. What are the other 2 attributes? Because it's not just about courage. There's something else. I'm just kind of curious from your standpoint. What would the other 2 virtues be?
Well, one of them would be the most cardinal of all cardinal virtues, prudence. You've got to be discerning. And I don't want you to make the mistake of lunging too far, even to the right, to all of a sudden create a convulsive effect. I think it has to be a bit more gradual than that. Otherwise, you're going to incur the wrath of a lot of people. You've got to move in the right direction. There's no question about that. Prudential judgment is important, but I'd also recommend that you pray for wisdom. I mean, it all comes down to that. Not knowledge so much as wisdom.
Yes.
And look at the teachings of the Holy Fathers and those people who can guide you. Look at success stories. You know, if you want to understand as a young man, as a pitcher, you want to look at the best pitchers out there. Well, look at the legacy of John Paul II. I happen to think Benedict never got a fair shake, so I'd look at his legacy too, but particularly John Paul II, because he was in my lifetime kind of like the Ronald Reagan who stood out over and above everybody else.
Yes.
So you have to have models, recent models in your mind.
Well, Dr. Donohue, I'm so grateful you were with us. We started this conversation an hour and a half ago or so about clarity. And if there's one thing that you push to your team, you want to be clear. And I think one day you'll be known as the patron saint of clarity. How about that? So thank you for your incredible defense of the faith through all these years. Every single time I've seen you over the decades go on Fox News or any news outlet, I would say, okay, we're about to get something awesome. So my dad and I both have been a huge fan of you for a long time. I'm so honored that you were here and giving us some clarity on what this papacy was about, what's happening now, and the challenges where the new pope's going to be looking at. So let's pray that the Holy Spirit does exactly what he wants to do in this next conclave, and no matter what happens, we'll try to both continue to be good sons of the Holy Mother Church. So
I want to thank you, and you got a great team here at TAN.
Thank you. We're very blessed. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks guys for checking out the Conor Gallagher Show. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, or comment, or whatever you got to do to support it. And I appreciate that very much.